In the year 1487, something happened in Tenochtitlan that no other civilization had ever attempted on such a scale. For 4 straight days, lines of captives stretched from the base of the Great Temple, across the causeways, and out toward the surrounding lake towns. The lines never stopped, not for a moment, not for 4 entire days. According to Aztec records, the number was 84,000. 84,000 people in 4 days. Historians argue about that figure. Some say it was exaggerated, others estimate closer to 20,000. A few believe the real number may have been even higher, but no one disputes why those people were there, and no one disputes what happened to them. You might think you know this story. Maybe you've seen something like it in Apocalypto. The chase, the capture, the stone altar, the knife, a body tumbling down the steps. That's the version designed for a 2-hour film. The real version lasted months, sometimes an entire year, because the Aztecs didn't just kill their captives. That would have been simple, fast, and nothing in this system was designed for speed. Some prisoners were fed the finest food in the empire. They were dressed in gold, taught to play instruments, given companions, given new names, names that weren't their own. They were worshipped. People in the streets bowed to them, touched their skin, prayed to them as if they were living gods. And then on a specific day, calculated months in advance by priests studying the stars, everything was taken away. The gold, the name, the god they had been turned into. All of it disappeared, and what remained was not a god. It was a man, standing at the base of a temple, with nowhere to go except up. A dead enemy couldn't be brought back to Tenochtitlan. He couldn't be painted, displayed, or used to feed what needed to be fed. That's why the ixiptla, the obsidian-bladed club, wasn't used to kill on the battlefield. It was used to wound, to break a leg, to tear open a shoulder, just enough to bring a man down without finishing him. Then he would be dragged away, bound, and the journey back to the capital would begin. That journey could take days, sometimes weeks. The captive was guarded, but not starved, not beaten. Because whatever awaited him in Tenochtitlan required him to arrive intact. And the first thing he saw when he entered the city was the temple, visible from every causeway, from the lake, from every street leading toward the ceremonial center, 45 meters tall, dark staircases stained with old blood. He knew what happened at the top. Everyone did. What he didn't know yet was whether he would be one of the ones climbing those steps, or something else entirely. Not all captives were treated the same. The Aztecs had a system to decide who went where. The first factor was the warrior who captured him. His rank, his record, his position. That determined the captive's initial value. The second factor was the captive himself. His size, his posture, his physical condition. Whether he fought well or fell quickly. Whether he showed fear during the march, or composure. Everything was observed, recorded, evaluated, because different rituals required different kinds of people. Some ceremonies needed large numbers, dozens, even hundreds. Those captives were processed quickly. Their fate came within days. Sometimes, within hours of arrival, they were climbing the temple steps. And at the top, the ritual followed a pattern everyone already knew. The obsidian blade. The chest opened. The heart removed, still beating. The body rolling down the stairs, and the next captive stepping forward. That was the large-scale version, the one that created the numbers recorded in 1487. But it wasn't the only version, because some captives were set aside. Not for mass ceremonies, but for something that took far longer. These individuals were selected based on criteria controlled by the priests. Physical appearance mattered, symmetry, skin condition, age, and something harder to define, something in the way a man carried himself. The sources describe it, but never fully explain it. A kind of presence, something that made him suitable for a different role. These men were not sent to the temple steps. They were taken to the Kalmakak, the priestly schools. And what happened there had no parallel anywhere else in the ancient world. The selected captive was washed, his war paint was removed, his hair was cut and cleaned, his body was purified with preparations used by the priests. Then he was dressed, not as a prisoner, not in rags, but in the ceremonial clothing of a god. Every major deity in the Aztec pantheon had a precise visual identity. Tezcatlipoca wore obsidian mirrors and a distinctive facial pattern. Ixiptla was associated with flayed skin. Huitzilopochtli was marked by hummingbird feathers and a specific shade of blue. The chosen captive was transformed to look exactly like the deity assigned to him. He became what the Aztecs called an ixiptla, a living image, not a representative, not an actor, not a man playing a role. Within Aztec theology, the ixiptla was the god. Not symbolically, literally. The moment those garments touched his body, his identity changed. His name was replaced by the name of the god. Those who spoke to him used divine titles. When he walked through the streets, people did not treat him like a disguised prisoner. They treated him like a divinity. They knelt before him, brought him offerings, asked for blessings, held up their children for him to touch. And this went on for months. The best documented version of this process involved the ixiptla of Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, one of the most important deities in the Aztec world. This captive lived as Tezcatlipoca for almost an entire year. During that time, he learned to play the flute, and not casually. He was trained to play it well. He was assigned 4 companions, also chosen for the ritual, presented as divine figures who stayed with him during the final weeks. He walked freely through the city. He ate the food of the nobility. He received flowers, incense, and gold ornaments that he wore in public. From the outside, it looked like the most privileged life any captive could possibly receive. But underneath all of it, something else was happening. The priests watched him constantly. Not because they feared he would escape. There was nowhere to run. Tenochtitlan was an island city connected by causeways, and every causeway was controlled. They watched him for another reason: his behavior, his mood, whether the transformation was working. Because the entire ritual depended on one specific outcome, one that no force could guarantee. When the day came, the captive had to walk to his death willingly, not dragged, not bound, not forced up the temple stairs by guards. He had to climb them on his own. As he ascended, he was expected to break the flutes he had played for months, one on each step. He had to reach the top in complete calm, and then he had to lie down on the stone by his own will. This is the point historians have struggled to explain for decades. Some argue it was psychological conditioning, that months of worship reshaped the captive's identity until he truly believed he was the god. That when the final day arrived, he no longer saw himself as a prisoner at all. Others argue resistance was simply impossible. Surrounded by thousands of people, trapped on an island, unarmed, cut off from allies, what would fighting have achieved? The ending was already decided. The only thing left under his control was dignity. A third interpretation, and the one the sources seem to support most directly, is that the Aztecs understood something about identity that modern psychology would only formalize centuries later. If you treat a person as something for long enough, in an environment that never breaks, with constant social reinforcement, that person begins to behave as that thing. Not always because he fully believes it, but because the line between acting and being starts to collapse. The captive did not have to believe he was a god. He only had to stop believing he was still a prisoner. And months of gold, music, ritual attention, physical comfort, and public adoration could do that. But there was one thing the priests could never fully erase. The captive always knew the date. The ceremonial calendar was public. Everyone in Tenochtitlan knew when the feast of Tezcatlipoca was coming, and the captive, living inside that divine identity, knew it too. Every day of luxury came with a countdown, and the sources record something the priests watched very closely. In the final weeks, some captives grew quiet. They stopped playing the flute, stopped speaking to their companions. They did not resist, they did not try to flee, they simply withdrew into themselves. The priests had a term for this. The sources translate it roughly as, "the god grows heavy." And when that happened, the ritual continued anyway. This is the kind of history most people never hear. Not every captive was turned into a god. Some were given something that, from the outside, looked like a chance. The festival of Tlacaxipehhualistli, the flaying of men, was one of the most crowded events in the Aztec ceremonial calendar. It honored Ixiptla, the god of agricultural renewal, spring, and the shedding of old skin. At the center of this ritual stood the temalacatl, a massive carved circular stone placed in a public space where hundreds, sometimes thousands, could watch. The captive was brought to that stone and tied by the waist. The rope was long enough to let him move, but short enough to ensure he could never escape. Then they gave him a weapon, a ixiptla, but not a real one. The obsidian blades, the edges sharp enough to sever limbs, had been removed. In their place, feathers. From a distance, it looked correct. The shape, the weight, the silhouette. Someone sitting 20 rows back might not notice the difference, but the man holding it, he knew immediately. This wasn't a weapon, it was a prop. Then the opponents arrived, eagle warriors, jaguar warriors, the highest-ranking fighters in the empire, men who had captured dozens of enemies, men whose entire lives had been war. They came fully armed, real ixiptla, real obsidian blades, real shields, full battle attire, and there were several of them. The captive faced them one at a time, but as soon as one stepped back, another took his place, fresh against exhausted, steel against feathers, free against bound, and the crowd watched everything. This wasn't hidden, it was public theatre. Nobles attended, allied rulers were invited, representatives from rival states, states that might one day send their own warriors to that same stone, sat in privileged seats. They had to see it. Now some captives fell quickly, overwhelmed, defeated within minutes, and the ritual moved on. But others fought. And this is where the system revealed its second purpose. Because if a captive fought well, if he resisted, if he drew blood, if he wounded one of the elite warriors, the crowd didn't react with horror. They approved. A strong captive elevated the ritual. It proved that the empire's enemies were formidable, and that in turn proved that Aztec warriors were even more formidable for having captured them. The captive's resistance didn't weaken the system, it validated it. And then there is the case of Tlahuicole, a Tlaxcalan war captain, captured during one of the so-called Flower Wars. The sources describe him as imposing, tall, broad, experienced in a way that set him apart from ordinary captives. When he was brought to Tenochtitlan, something unusual happened. The emperor, whether Moctezuma I or II, depending on the account, offered him freedom. Not exile, not ransom, freedom. Tlahuicole could return to Tlaxcala, or if he preferred, he could stay, serve as a commander in the Aztec army, lead troops, live in the capital with rank and status. He refused both options. He chose the temalacatl. The sources are clear about that, but not about why. Some later interpretations suggest that returning home as a freed captive, not one who escaped or was rescued, would have been a deeper dishonor than death. Others suggest his own warrior code demanded it. Among Tlaxcalan fighters, being captured was already a failure. Returning after that failure, carrying the weight of accepting mercy from the enemy, that could have been a kind of social death worse than the physical one. Whatever the reason, Tlahuicole stepped onto the stone willingly. He was tied, he was given the feathered weapon, and according to surviving accounts, he did not fall quickly. He wounded several eagle warriors. Some sources even claim he killed one, though that remains debated. He lasted longer than any captive in recent memory. The crowd watched a man fight a battle he had already chosen to lose, and when he finally fell, the ritual continued, because it always continued, no matter how well a captive fought. The ending was never in question. What happened next is described in the sources with far less ambiguity. The body was given to the warrior who had originally captured him. That was his right. The captor then assumed specific ritual responsibilities, duties that continued even after death. And what those duties involved is recorded in the codices. It is, quite literally, the origin of the festival's name, the flaying of men. Every visiting ruler who watched a captive fight with a feathered weapon understood the message without translation. This is what your warriors will face if they resist. This is how your strongest men will end. And this is what your people will become. Offerings dressed in gold, walking willingly toward a stone they cannot escape. Because this system wasn't just religion, it wasn't just military tradition, it was infrastructure. The flower wars were scheduled, repeated, negotiated. The supply of captives was managed, not random. The selection process in Tenochtitlan was standardized. Classification into different ritual roles was bureaucratic. The ixiptla process required months of investment, training, and resources. The priesthood operated something very close to a production chain. And the combat on the temalacatl, that was staged. For foreign dignitaries, it was communication. The system served three functions at once. It fed the religious structure that legitimized Aztec authority. Every ceremony proved the gods supported the empire. Every heart offered at the temple confirmed that the cosmic order continued because the Aztecs maintained it. Beneath that, it kept the warrior class active, competitive, hierarchical. Without captives, the entire status system collapsed. There was no way to rise, no way to gain prestige. Peace was not desirable. Peace meant stagnation. And beneath everything was politics. Public spectacles were watched by the very states the empire needed to control. Trade partners, border communities, potential rebels. They watched, they calculated, and they stayed in line. Not because the Aztecs were unbeatable, Tlaxcala proved they could be resisted, but because the cost of being captured had been demonstrated so precisely, so elaborately, so publicly. That submission was often cheaper. These rituals were not religion that accidentally became political. They were politics using religion. And at the center of it all were the captives. Men who were fed, dressed, trained, worshipped, given useless weapons, and sacrificed on schedule. They were the raw material of a machine that could not function without them. So when the Spanish arrived in 1519, they found an empire built on captives. Cortés didn't fully understand what he was seeing at first. His interpreters tried to explain. Bernal Díaz del Castillo, one of the soldiers who documented the conquest, described the temple complex with a level of detail that suggests genuine shock. Walls darkened by old blood, a constant smell in the air, and the tzompantli, skull racks, holding rows upon rows of human skulls. Modern archaeology has confirmed those structures, thousands of skulls, arranged exactly as described. But this is what Cortés and his men realized very quickly, something the Aztecs' neighbors had understood for generations. The system had a dependency. It needed enemies who could be captured, but never fully destroyed. Tlaxcala, Huexotzinco, Cholula. These states existed in a permanent condition of controlled conflict with the Aztec Triple Alliance. They were never fully conquered, never completely absorbed, because if they were, the flower wars would end. And if the flower wars ended, the captives would disappear. And if the captives disappeared, the ceremonies would stop. The warriors could not rise, the gods could not be fed, and the political theatre holding the empire together would collapse. The entire system depended on its enemies remaining enemies. That's what Cortés exploited. He didn't march on Tenochtitlan with 500 Spaniards. He marched with tens of thousands of Tlaxcalan warriors, men who had spent generations feeding that machine. They didn't join him because they admired European culture. They joined him because they had watched their brothers, their sons, their war captains climb those temple steps and they wanted it to end. Apocalypto shows a man running for his life. That's the cinematic version. The real system didn't chase its captives. It invited them, dressed them in gold, called them gods, gave them music, food, companionship, and worship. Let them walk freely through the most advanced city in the Western Hemisphere, and then asked them to climb the steps themselves. The prisoners of the Aztec Empire were not simply killed. They were processed, classified, assigned a role, and made to perform it. Until the calendar said it was time. The man on the temalacatl, swinging a feathered weapon at warriors with real obsidian blades, was not fighting to survive. He was fulfilling a function, and when he fell, the next man stepped forward, because the system did not stop. It never stopped. Not until someone realized that its greatest strength, its need for permanent enemies, was also the one thing keeping it alive. If you made it this far, you're part of a community that doesn't look away from the parts of history others avoid. Subscribe to Wounds of History, turn on notifications, and tell me in the comments which moment in this story you won't forget. Next week, another story they never taught you, and it's worse.